There's no denying that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism exist in the world. For some, it is founded on years of propaganda, while for others it is spurred from constantly skewed information. No matter the source, it is threatening the existence of the only democracy in the Middle East and the United States' only true ally in the region.
In every situation, and after almost every move that Israel has made in order to defend itself, the country has been demonized by the media and by its many enemies in the Middle East.
We created this short documentary to provide facts on the many issues Israel faces.
Operation Cast Lead is only one more recent example of this.
In the summer of 2007, Hamas, the anti-Israel, anti-America radical Islamic group, overthrew the rival Fatah party and took control of the Gaza Strip. Between 2005 and 2007, around 2,700 rockets were fired into Israel by Hamas. This is direct terrorism and affected the daily lives of Israeli citizens who had to go into bunkers whenever the rocket siren began.
The day after Israel decided to let the people of Gaza govern themselves, they began immediately firing rockets into Israel. When the world talks about what happened during the Gaza war, which included Israeli airstrikes, ground invasion, and naval activity, the focus is usually on the number of Palestinian casualties. What the vast majority of the media does not mention is the steps Israel took in order to reduce any civilian casualties. In addition to the official warnings from the Prime Minister and Defense Minister of Israel, numerous leaflets were dropped over Gaza which said, "For your safety, we ask of you to leave the area." Of course, Hamas never warns Israelis.
They hid their military equipment in civilian houses, schools, and hospitals. Footage shows that during Israel's attack, Palestinian fighters used civilians, including children, as human shields, which is directly against international law. It's the underdog effect which creates such intense scrutiny against Israel. On the map of the Middle East, the Gaza Strip is clearly the smaller entity. Of course, this effect is blinding so many people from what Israel has been doing right, and instead Israel appears as some sort of schoolyard bully. Israel needs to defend themselves, because nobody deserves to live in a constant state of fear.
For 6 months prior to Cast Lead, Israeli forces researched military targets to minimize civilian casualties.
Taking control of the situation was a complete necessity at that point. Make no mistakes. International law states that a country has the right to defend itself, and Israel should be no different. In the winter of 2008, Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak warned Gaza that further fire would not be tolerated. Each year, the number of rockets fired into Israel was increasing. Around 1,775 in 2006, more than 2,000 in 2007, and more than 3,700 rockets in 2008, at the end of which Israel finally invaded Gaza.
Before Israel launched the operation, they notified Palestinians about the upcoming attack. When was the last time that Hamas warned Israel about their rockets?
It's just sad that so much of the world does not hear about the positive facts and instead isolates any thread of negativity that they can find. When all that is brought up is the negative, then the negative becomes amplified and suddenly Israel's reputation is lowered. While the thousands of rockets fired into Israel, which are blatant acts of terrorism, are rarely called out by the international world, Israel's attempts to defend itself are quickly condemned and Israel is demonized once again.
If we look at the recent flotilla incident aboard the Mavi Marmara coming from Turkey to provide aid for the Palestinians, we can see just how negatively Israel is portrayed within the media. It is reasonable that Israel has security checkpoints due to the constant calling for Israel's destruction by Hamas. It is only after this that Israel blockades the ports into Gaza and regulates the materials brought in.
Israel's intent on blockading the ports in Gaza is to protect its citizens and to reduce the number of terror attacks against the Israeli people.
Can anyone really say that a country like Israel, that is always being attacked, is at fault for demanding security checks?
After the ships refused to follow Israeli instruction of porting in Israel and continuing to move towards Gaza, Israeli soldiers boarded the vessel in order to contain the situation. They were equipped with paintball guns and handguns to be used as a last resort. As the IDF soldiers were on the ship, they were beaten with blunt objects relentlessly. In defense, the Israeli soldiers were forced to respond.
Video evidence shows that Israeli soldiers were attacked upon immediately boarding the ships. They were beaten with metal pipes and various other weapons.
It is rare to hear about the actions of the passengers who assaulted the Israeli soldiers, forcing them to defend themselves. Also, it is rare to hear the media mention any of the aid that Israel has previously delivered to Gaza. Up to this day, Israel continues to supply aid to the Palestinian people in Gaza, despite their constant incitement of violence against all of Israel. And as the attacks against Israeli civilians and soldiers continue to be launched, Israel still values the lives of Palestinians.
From 1993 up until disengagement from Gaza, there have been many attempts at peace. The Palestinians either rejected them or did not keep up their word.
Despite the accusations of wanting to conquer more land, Israel has constantly offered up large portions to the Palestinians.
Israel is ready to coexist peacefully. Are the Palestinians?
How much more can Israel do for peace? When is enough enough?